The rain pounded against the tin roof of the auction barn, creating a rhythmic sound that echoed through the dimly lit space. Weathered men, their faces marked by years of hard work, leaned against the wooden railing, watching the last few horses being presented. In the center of the arena, standing on damp straw, was a chestnut-colored horse with a dull coat and tired eyes. His ribs were visible beneath his skin, and his tangled mane hung lifelessly over his neck. He looked like he belonged to another time, an animal forgotten by the world. The auctioneer, a thin man with a patchy mustache named Virgil Henshaw, tapped his gavel against the podium and announced, without much enthusiasm, "And here we have, an unregistered horse. Old, no known pedigree. Let's start at $50. Anyone?" Silence filled the barn. The buyers had come for strong, pedigreed horses, not a creature that could barely hold its head up. Off to the side, a man wearing a battered hat and a thoughtful expression stroked his graying beard. His name was Ambrose Calloway, a stubborn farmer who had seen many animals thrown away like they were nothing. He let out a long breath, hesitated for a moment, and then raised his hand. $50. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the crowd. "Ambrose and his habit of taking home useless strays," someone muttered. But he ignored the whispers. The gavel came down once more. "Sold to Mr. Calloway." Ambrose couldn't quite explain why he had bought the horse. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was instinct. But something about this animal felt different. What he didn't know was that by loading the horse into his rusty old trailer and taking him home, he was bringing a long-buried secret to his farm, a secret that would change everything. The old truck rattled along the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the thick evening fog. The rhythmic sound of hooves shifting against the rusty trailer echoed in the night. Ambrose Calloway gripped the steering wheel with one hand while the other rested on the worn leather of his bench seat. The weight of the auction still sat heavy in his chest. He had no business buying another horse, especially not one in such poor condition. His farm wasn't what it used to be. The barns were aging, the fences needed fixing, and money wasn't as easy to come by these days. But something in the horse's eyes had struck him deep. It wasn't just exhaustion or neglect. It was something else, something he couldn't quite place. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time he pulled up to his farm. The wooden gate creaked as he swung it open, the mud thick under his boots. He backed the trailer in, switched off the engine, and stepped out, breathing in the damp scent of earth and hay. The farm was quiet except for the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustling of trees in the wind. Ambrose unlatched the trailer's door and stepped back. For a moment, the horse didn't move. He stood there, his ears flicking at the sounds of the night, his breath coming in slow, heavy puffs. Then, with an almost reluctant step, he walked down the ramp. Ambrose watched as the horse hesitated, then lifted his head slightly, as if taking in his surroundings. The dim barn lights cast a golden glow over the paddock, revealing more of the horse's condition. Up close, Ambrose could see the old scars along its legs, the faded white stripe running down its forehead. His ribs pressed against his skin, but despite his frail appearance, there was strength in the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, as if each step carried purpose. Ambrose sighed. "Well, guess we better get you settled in," he muttered, patting the horse's neck gently. The horse flinched at the touch. Not in fear, but in a way that made Ambrose pause. It was almost as if he was waiting for something. Ambrose led him into the barn, guiding him into an empty stall. The old wooden walls smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth. He filled a bucket with water, watching as the horse took a cautious sip before stepping back. He wasn't desperate, wasn't frantic like most neglected animals. He was controlled, composed. Ambrose folded his arms, studying him. "What's your story, boy?" The horse simply blinked at him, his deep brown eyes unreadable. It was only then, as Ambrose leaned against the stall door, that he noticed something strange. A marking, partially hidden beneath the mud and grime caked onto the horse's side. It was faint, almost invisible under the dim barn light. But there was no mistaking it. It was a brand. An old, weathered brand. Ambrose's heart skipped a beat. That mark, it was familiar. Too familiar. His stomach twisted as memories he had long buried clawed their way to the surface. And for the first time that night, Ambrose felt something close to fear. Ambrose couldn't tear his eyes away from the brand on the horse's side. He stepped closer, brushing his calloused fingers over the faded marking, clearing away some of the dried mud. His breath hitched. The shape, it was unmistakable. A circle with an arrow through it. Ambrose took a slow step back, his pulse quickening. That brand belonged to Halston Stables, one of the most prestigious racing barns in the country. A place known for breeding champions, for selling horses worth more than entire farms like his. But how in the hell did a horse from a place like that end up half-starved at a backwoods auction for $50? The realization sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just some nameless, unwanted horse. This animal had a history, one that someone had clearly tried to erase. Ambrose swallowed hard. He needed answers. He turned to the tack room, where an old dust-covered filing cabinet sat wedged between stacks of forgotten saddles and rusting tools. His hands trembled slightly as he rummaged through a drawer filled with faded documents and dog-eared auction catalogs. He had spent years attending sales, keeping notes on bloodlines, brands, and barns. It was a habit from when he used to dream big, back when he thought he might make a name for himself in the horse world. Flipping through the brittle pages, his eyes darted from one old listing to another. And then, suddenly, there it was. A photograph. A younger version of the same horse, his coat shining, his muscles lean and defined. He was standing tall, a champion's fire in his eyes. Below the picture, the name was printed in bold, elegant letters. Waymaker, sired by Iron Legacy, owned by Halston Stables. Ambrose exhaled sharply. He had heard that name before. Hell, everyone had heard that name before. Waymaker wasn't just some horse. He was a legend. 5 years ago, he had been one of the most promising racehorses in the country. People called him the horse with heart, known for coming from behind in impossible races, defying odds. But then, one day, he disappeared. No one knew why. The racing world had whispered rumors, an injury, a scandal, a cover-up, but no solid answers ever came. Until now. Ambrose looked from the old photograph to the frail, tired creature in front of him. It seemed impossible. How had this once great champion fallen so far? And why had someone wanted to get rid of him so badly? The horse, Waymaker, stood quietly in the stall, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. Ambrose felt a chill crawl up his spine. Somewhere, somehow, someone didn't want this horse to be found. And now, he was tangled up in something much bigger than he ever bargained for. Ambrose sat at his worn wooden table, the dim glow of the farmhouse lamp casting long shadows across the room. The old racing catalog lay open before him, Waymaker's picture staring back as if demanding answers. His mind raced. How had a horse once worth millions ended up abandoned at a backwoods auction, sold for pennies? And more importantly, who had let that happen? Outside, the barn creaked as the wind howled through the trees. Waymaker was settled in for the night, but Ambrose couldn't shake the unease crawling through his chest. He reached for the old rotary phone on the wall, his fingers hovering over the dial. There was only one person he could call. With a deep breath, he dialed. After 3 rings, a voice answered. "You still alive, Calloway?" Ambrose huffed. "Nice to hear from you too, Levi." Levi Grayson had once been a top trainer in the racing world, back before a messy falling out with Halston Stables. He and Ambrose went way back. Both men had started their careers around the same time, but while Ambrose had chosen the quiet life of a small-town farmer, Levi had climbed to the top. Until he wasn't at the top anymore. Tell me you didn't just call me for a bedtime story." Levi's voice was gruff, laced with suspicion. Ambrose leaned forward, gripping the receiver. "I bought a horse today. Old, neglected. Had a brand I recognized." Silence. Then, "What brand?" Ambrose hesitated. "Halston Stables." A sharp exhale on the other end of the line. "You sure?" "Positive. And I think it's Waymaker." The line went dead quiet. For a moment, Ambrose thought Levi had hung up. But then, "Where are you?" "My farm." "But listen, Levi. I'm coming." The line clicked dead. Ambrose sat back, exhaling slowly. Whatever was going on, Levi clearly knew something. And judging by his reaction, it wasn't anything good. The next morning, just as the sun began to break over the hills, a battered black pickup truck rolled down Ambrose's long dirt driveway. Levi stepped out, his tall frame stiff with tension. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and deep lines creased his face. He looked around warily before striding toward the barn. Waymaker stood in the stall, ears flicking forward as Levi approached. For a long moment, Levi simply stared at him. Then, in a low voice, he murmured, "Son of a bitch, it really is him." Ambrose crossed his arms. "Tell me what's going on, Levi. Why would a horse like this end up abandoned?" Levi dragged a hand down his face. "Because, Ambrose, Waymaker wasn't just thrown away. Someone made sure he disappeared." Ambrose felt a chill settle in his bones. "And if they find out he's still alive, they'll want to finish what they started." A tense silence filled the barn, broken only by the occasional sound of Waymaker shifting in his stall. Ambrose studied Levi's face, searching for answers. The older man looked shaken, truly shaken, and that wasn't something Ambrose had seen in him before. "Start talking, Levi," Ambrose demanded, his voice low. "Who would want to get rid of a horse like this? And why?" Levi exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "Halston Stables isn't just any racing barn. It's got power, money, and a long history of covering up things they don't want the world to know." Ambrose narrowed his eyes. "And Waymaker?" Levi hesitated, then turned to look at the horse, his expression unreadable. 5 years ago, he was their golden boy. Fast, strong, heart like no other. But then, right before the Belmont Stakes, he disappeared. Ambrose frowned. "Disappeared? You're telling me they lost $1 million racehorse overnight?" Levi shook his head. "No, they didn't lose him. They buried him." A heavy weight settled in Ambrose's chest. "There were rumors," Levi continued. "Some folks said he was injured and Halston didn't want the bad press. Others thought maybe he tested positive for something that would have ruined their reputation. But I never bought those stories." Ambrose leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "Then what do you think happened?" Levi glanced around the barn, as if expecting someone to be listening. "I think Waymaker saw something he wasn't supposed to." Ambrose scoffed. "He's a horse, Levi. What the hell could he have seen?" Levi's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But I do know that Halston doesn't just throw away champions. If they wanted him gone, they had a damn good reason." Ambrose glanced at Waymaker. The horse stood still, watching them with those deep, intelligent eyes. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet control, the sharp awareness. It was unlike any horse Ambrose had ever owned. "So what now?" Ambrose asked. "What do I do with him?" Levi's voice was grim. "You either hide him, or you find out the truth. But either way, Ambrose," he met his eyes, his face deadly serious, "if Halston finds out Waymaker is still alive, they won't just come for him. They'll come for you too." A cold knot of fear twisted in Ambrose's gut. He had spent his whole life keeping his head down, staying out of trouble. But now, without meaning to, he had walked straight into something dangerous. And there was no turning back. A cold wind swept through the open barn doors, rattling the wooden beams overhead. Ambrose felt the weight of Levi's words settle deep in his chest. "They'll come for you too." The thought sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. He had never been the kind of man to go looking for trouble, but somehow, trouble had found him anyway. Waymaker shifted in his stall, his ears twitching as if sensing the tension in the air. The old horse was no ordinary animal. Ambrose was sure of that now. But whether he was a key to some buried secret or just an inconvenient reminder of something Halston Stables wanted to forget, one thing was clear. Keeping him here was a risk. Levi let out a slow breath and turned toward the barn entrance, his boots crunching against the straw-covered floor. "You have no idea what you're caught up in, Ambrose." "Then tell me," Ambrose said, his voice firm. "What the hell am I up against?" Levi hesitated before glancing toward the horse once more. Halston Stables isn't just a racing operation. They've got deep pockets, high-powered connections. They've covered up scandals before. If Waymaker is still alive, it means something went wrong with their plan. Ambrose frowned. "Plan? You think they meant to kill him?" Levi's expression darkened. "Maybe. Maybe not. But one thing's for damn sure, if they let him go, it wasn't out of kindness." A tense silence filled the barn. Ambrose leaned against the stall, his arms crossed tightly. His farm had always been his sanctuary, his escape from the world. But now it felt different. Exposed. Vulnerable. A sudden noise outside made both men turn their heads sharply. The distant sound of tires crunching over gravel. Ambrose's heart pounded as he stepped toward the barn door, peering out into the night. Headlights. A black SUV was crawling down the long driveway, moving slow, deliberate. "Damn it," Levi muttered under his breath. "They already know." Ambrose clenched his jaw. He had lived a quiet life for decades, avoiding trouble. But now, he was standing in the middle of it. And the men in that SUV weren't here to make conversation. He turned back to Waymaker, who stood tall and still in his stall, watching everything with quiet intelligence. "What the hell did you get me into, boy?" The SUV came to a stop. The engine idled. And then, a car door opened. The low rumble of the idling SUV sent a pulse of unease through Ambrose's chest. He wiped his hands on his jeans, forcing himself to stay calm. Whoever these people were, they weren't here by accident. Levi's jaw tightened. "Stay quiet. Let me handle this." Ambrose wasn't so sure about that, but he nodded. A second car door opened. Two figures stepped out, both men dressed too clean for farm life. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black wool coat over an expensive-looking shirt. The other was shorter, wiry, with sharp eyes that flicked toward the barn like he already knew what was inside. Ambrose stepped onto the porch, his boots scraping against the wooden planks. "Something I can help you with?" The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You Ambrose Calloway?" Ambrose took his time before answering. "Who's asking?" The man in the wool coat pulled a sleek leather wallet from his pocket, flipping it open. A badge. "Richard Halston. I run Halston Stables." His voice was smooth, controlled. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. Ambrose's stomach twisted. Halston. The man standing on his porch was the Richard Halston, the same man whose stable had produced dozens of champion racehorses. A man who rarely left his Kentucky estate unless it was for something that truly mattered. Ambrose forced his expression to stay neutral. "Didn't expect to have company this late." Halston smiled again, tucking the badge away. "Apologies for the hour." I won't take much of your time. I just have a few questions. Ambrose crossed his arms. About what? Halston's gaze flickered toward the barn. I believe you recently acquired a horse at auction. Ambrose felt Levi shift slightly beside him. I pick up horses all the time. Halston's smile never wavered. Of course. But this particular one, I think he might have belonged to us. Ambrose's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew this was coming, but hearing the words made his skin prickle. That so? Halston nodded. We had a horse go missing some years back. Waymaker. A real beauty. But he vanished without a trace. Never knew what happened to him. That is, until we heard a certain farmer picked up an old chestnut with a very specific brand. Ambrose swallowed hard, keeping his expression unreadable. And if I do have him? Halston's smile faded slightly. Then I'd like to buy him back. I'll pay well, far more than whatever you spent at auction. Silence. Levi finally spoke, his voice low. Seems funny, Mr. Halston, that a horse like that would just go missing. Halston barely glanced at him. I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to take back what belongs to me. Ambrose clenched his fists at his sides. Every instinct told him not to trust this man. Waymaker wasn't just a lost horse to Halston. He was a problem. And problems like this didn't get a second chance. I appreciate the offer, Ambrose said carefully, but I'm not looking to sell. The wiry man beside Halston finally spoke. His voice was colder, sharper. That's a mistake. A long silence stretched between them. Halston exhaled through his nose, adjusting the cuff of his coat. Think it over, Mr. Calloway. But I'll warn you, some things are better left buried. He turned without another word, walking back to the SUV. The wiry man hesitated, eyes locking onto Ambrose like a silent threat, then followed. The doors shut. The engine revved. And then, just as quietly as they came, they were gone. Ambrose let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Levi muttered a curse. That wasn't a request. That was a warning. Ambrose turned back toward the barn, his jaw set. Then they just made a mistake too. Because if Halston wanted to keep something buried, Ambrose was damn sure going to dig it up. The distant hum of the SUV's engine had long faded into the night, but the weight of Halston's words still lingered in the cold air. Ambrose stood on the porch, staring down the empty road, his jaw tight. Every instinct in him told him one thing: Halston wasn't done. Levi let out a slow breath beside him. You know what this means, right? Ambrose nodded, his eyes dark with determination. Yeah. They don't just want Waymaker back. They want him gone. Levi gave him a sharp look. And you're not thinking of giving him up, are you? Ambrose turned, walking toward the barn. Hell no. Inside, the old wooden structure was dimly lit, the scent of hay and horse sweat filling the air. Waymaker stood in his stall, ears twitching as Ambrose approached. The horse had been watching them the entire time, silent, waiting. Ambrose placed a firm hand on his neck, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. You've got a story to tell, don't you, boy? Waymaker exhaled, his breath hot against the cool air. Levi leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. If you're serious about this, we need to figure out what Halston's hiding. Ambrose nodded. And I know where to start. The next morning, Ambrose and Levi sat at the worn wooden table in the farmhouse, a laptop open between them. The glow of the screen flickered across their tired faces as they scrolled through article after article, searching for any mention of Waymaker's disappearance. Most of the reports from 5 years ago followed the same script: tragic loss, champion gone without a trace, mystery surrounds racehorse's fate. But none of them had answers. No official statements from Halston Stables, no evidence of injury, no explanation for how $1 million horse could simply vanish. Levi grunted. They scrubbed the story clean. Ambrose rubbed his temple. There's gotta be something they missed. Then, buried deep in the search results, he found it. A small, forgotten blog post from a former track employee. He clicked. The page loaded slowly, the text grainy and cluttered with ads. The title read, "The Night Waymaker Disappeared. What Really Happened?" Ambrose and Levi exchanged glances. Ambrose started reading aloud, "I worked at Halston Stables for 3 years. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. And the night before Waymaker disappeared, something happened at that barn. Something bad." A cold chill ran down Ambrose's spine. The post went on to describe a heated argument between Richard Halston and an unknown man. The employee claimed he had overheard snippets of their conversation, something about a deal gone wrong and someone paying the price. But the most chilling part was at the bottom of the post. Waymaker didn't just disappear. He was meant to disappear. And I think someone died that night because of it. The words sent a shudder through the room. Levi leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Son of a bitch." Ambrose's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "This isn't just about a horse. This is about something bigger." Levi nodded. "And if Halston is willing to go this far to keep it quiet." Ambrose looked toward the barn, where Waymaker stood, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "Then we're in a hell of a lot more danger than we thought." The farmhouse felt smaller, the air heavier. Ambrose stared at the words on the screen. Waymaker didn't just disappear. He was meant to disappear. And I think someone died that night because of it. Levi let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the table. Halston didn't just cover up a missing horse. He covered up a crime. Ambrose's jaw tightened. And if someone died, it means there's proof somewhere. We just have to find it before they find us. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. It wasn't frantic, but it wasn't friendly either. Levi moved first, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle leaning against the wall. Ambrose peered through the small window. A young woman stood on the porch, her dark jacket soaked from the misty morning air. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, but when she saw Ambrose watching, she lifted her chin with quiet determination. Ambrose hesitated before pulling the door open. "Who are you?" The woman swallowed hard. "My name is Claire Lawson." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Levi stiffened beside him. Claire's voice was firm but urgent. "I know about Waymaker, and I know why Halston wants him dead." Ambrose exchanged a glance with Levi, then stepped aside. "You better come in." Claire sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "Ray Lawson was my father," she said, her voice quieter now. "He worked for Halston Stables for years. But 5 years ago, something changed. He found out something he wasn't supposed to. And then, one night, he never came home." Levi exhaled sharply. "The same night Waymaker disappeared." Claire nodded, eyes dark with grief. "Halston said it was an accident. That my father was drunk and fell from the hayloft. But my dad didn't drink. And he sure as hell didn't fall." Her hands trembled as she pulled a small flash drive from her jacket and placed it on the table. "This has security footage from that night. My father must have known something was coming, because he hid this before they got to him. It shows everything. Halston arguing with my dad, the fight, and what happened after." Ambrose stared at the tiny piece of plastic and metal, knowing it held the key to everything. "Proof," Levi muttered. "This could bring Halston down." But before anyone could move, the sound of tires on gravel. Levi rushed to the window, his face darkening. Black SUV. Same as before. Claire's breath hitched. They found me. A gunshot shattered the front window, glass spraying across the room. Move! Levi yelled, grabbing Claire by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. Ambrose didn't think. He just acted. Get to the barn. We ride. Another shot rang out as they ran, but Ambrose wasn't worried about himself anymore. They weren't just coming for them. They were coming to finish what they started. Gunfire shattered the night as Ambrose, Levi, and Claire bolted toward the barn, their breaths ragged. A bullet struck the truck's windshield, glass raining onto the mud, but Ambrose didn't slow. Waymaker was their only way out. He threw open the stall door, locking eyes with the horse. The fire was still there, the heart of a champion. No saddle, no time. Ambrose swung onto his back, Claire scrambling up behind him. Levi mounted another horse just as Halston's men rushed toward the barn, guns raised. Go! Ambrose kicked Waymaker's sides, and the old racehorse exploded forward as if he had never stopped running. Hooves thundered against the rain-soaked earth, his muscles working in perfect rhythm. The SUVs skidded through the mud, headlights bouncing wildly as they struggled to keep up. But they had no chance. Waymaker was built for this. Ahead, the railway bridge loomed, a death trap of rotting wood and rusted rails. It was their only shot. Waymaker lunged onto the bridge, hooves landing firm on the unstable planks. Ambrose held his breath as the boards groaned and splintered beneath them. Levi's horse followed, just as the first SUV screeched to a halt at the edge. Then, crack! A massive section of the bridge collapsed into the raging river below. Halston's men stood stranded, their path destroyed. They couldn't follow. Ambrose pulled Waymaker to a stop, his hands trembling as he patted the horse's damp neck. Levi's breath was heavy beside him, Claire still gripping his waist. They turned back to the wreckage, the bridge now nothing but debris. Claire exhaled shakily. We made it. Ambrose looked down at Waymaker, the horse standing tall, unshaken. A slow smile crossed his face. Hell of a run, old man. The world had forgotten him once. Now they would remember.